Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Old State House. We're happy to see you here on this rainy day, so we appreciate you coming out. My name is Rebecca Tabor-Conover. I'm head of public programs and History Day in Connecticut, and we're really happy to have you here with us. Much as we all hate to admit it, this summer is coming to a close, and if you've been shopping lately, you've noticed the back-to-school sales are starting. So we're really pleased to have Dr. Dianna Wentzell here with us, the new Commissioner of Education for the state of Connecticut, and really looking forward to the conversation this afternoon. Before we start with our program, I'd like to encourage you to come to some of our upcoming programs. This Friday, which is supposed to be a nice sunny day, please come back and join us for the Farmers Market, which lasts from 11 a.m. to 2 p.m. And this Friday, we will have a concert at noon, a free concert by the Ken Moore Band. So you can come bring your lunch and do some shopping and enjoy some music. In September, we have a very busy September, and on September the 16th, we have a very special program with Dr. Marcus Rediker. You may know Dr. Rediker as the author of the Amistad Rebellion, an Atlantic Odyssey of Slavery and Freedom. He is going to be here at the Old State House for a screening of a new documentary about his trip to Africa called The Ghosts of Amistad. Check out our Facebook page and you can find details about that program. And on September the 22nd, we'll have our conversation at noon, and that program is going to be on Connecticut's rural spaces in urban places, so I'd encourage you to come back for that. Our marketing department would like me to remind you to please fill out your surveys because we truly do look at them, and if you have ideas for upcoming programs, we'd love to hear them. And without further ado, I'm really pleased to be able to introduce my colleague and friend, Diane Smith from the Connecticut Network.
Rebecca, appreciate it. And it's my pleasure to introduce our new Commissioner of Education, but let me just say a word about her first. I should say that education and education reform have been hot topics, not just in this state, but across the country for at least a decade now. The achievement gap, federal involvement in our schools and curriculum, Common Core, so many controversies have come up. They've been widely debated, widely discussed. Those topics and many more are now under the oversight of the new Commissioner of Education, Dr. Dianna Wentzell. After a 25-year career in education, including more than 12 years in the classroom, serving as Hartford's Assistant Superintendent of Schools and the Chief Academic Officer of the State Department of Education, Dr. Dianna Wentzell officially took over Connecticut's top education post in April. So during the next hour, we have a lot to discuss, so we're going to get started. And if any of you have a question at any point or a comment you'd like to make to the Commissioner, please raise your hand and we'll get to you with a microphone. So thank you so much for joining us. And Commissioner, I want to thank you for being a judge for History Day. That's a project that we are very proud of here and that we really are very much in debt to all of our judges, and to have you as a judge was just terrific.
Oh, well, thank you. History Day is one of my very favorite educational activities, and activities like that let kids engage and really do inquiry, and just wonderful opportunities for our kids in Connecticut.
Well, we use this as a little commercial to say anybody who wants to get involved in History Day, get in touch with us because it's going to be great again this year.
That's right.
I would like to start out by talking a little bit about your teaching career. As you know, there was a bill this session that would require that the next commissioner have both teaching experience, classroom experience, and administrative experience. The governor wasn't too keen on the bill. I think he vetoed it, but you have both and he appointed you. So tell me, let's start with your teaching experience. Tell us a little bit about it.
Well, I was very fortunate to begin my career in Farmington, Connecticut, and I taught in Farmington for over 10 years, and it was a wonderful experience, a great place to learn how to be a teacher, very well supported, great place to grow. And I taught social studies, which is, you can understand why I love History Day so much. I love being engaged with kids and helping them uncover their civic pathway to get more engaged in their communities. After I left teaching social studies in Farmington, I was able to develop a program for gifted and talented students and was the teacher in that program, as is often the case, and continued my involvement in activities like History Day. And I see my friends from Connecticut Invention Convention here and Model UN, and wonderful activities that kids can be involved in throughout the curriculum and beyond. So the enrichment world was very exciting for me. I left that to go to CREC and help open a magnet school.
Along the way, you had an interesting year teaching, I guess I can call it abroad.
Yes.
Let's talk
yes,
about
I
that a
did.
little bit.
Yeah.
I don't know how many people know about that. I hadn't known about it until you and I actually talked before this
Right.
program.
Well, I had the opportunity while I was in Farmington. We had a global education coordinator, which is a wonderful thing for a school district to have. And she networked with places like the World Affairs Council and other places to help us learn more about the world so that our kids who are growing up in a time that's very different than the world that I grew up in. And so they would know more about the world. So through that, I became connected with the Fulbright Hayes Fellowship for Teachers and traveled to Pakistan and then taught for a year in an international school there.
In Islamabad?
In Islamabad, Pakistan.
What an experience that must have been.
It was quite an experience, yeah.
Because you raised the topic of social studies, and that's something very near and dear to our hearts here at the Old State House and with our Connecticut Network, let's start just a little bit about that, about the new social studies framework. We're very interested in getting people connected with their democracy, and I think it starts in school.
Oh, I think it does. It starts in school and at home and in the homeschool partnership. And we're so excited about the new social studies framework in Connecticut. We are the first state in the United States to come forward with a new framework built on the C3. And the C3 is a framework developed by the National Council for Social Studies that involves the C's are for college, career, and civic engagement. Because as we know, we've talked a lot in the last few years about getting all of our kids ready for college and career. But as a great mentor of mine that's part of our social studies community said to our board recently, all of them will be citizens. So some of our kids will be doctors, some will be engineers, some will be teachers, but all of them will be citizens, and they need to be ready to take their place in our civic life. So the C3 is a framework, and then our social studies framework in Connecticut is built from that. And it pays equal attention to 4 disciplines in social studies: history, civics, geography, and economics.
Okay.
And for us, that's new, because in the past, we often would do a year of history, and if the teacher brought in those other social studies aspects, it was because they knew about them. This really helps all of our teachers bring in all of the disciplines that our kids need to really be ready to take their place in the civic lives.
And at what level in school does that start?
It's from kindergarten through 12th grade.
Wow, it's pretty impressive. I didn't learn anything about economics until I was in college. I don't even know if I knew what it was. I want to ask you a little bit about the classroom today. I know that since you become commissioner and before that you travel to quite a few schools and you observe what teachers are doing. How is teaching today different than it was when you were teaching, or is it?
Well, that's a great question, because I think in some ways there are some aspects of teaching that are as old as Aristotle, and others that are new all the time. One of the things I see a lot in classrooms now that I'm really excited about is that we're paying more attention to helping kids talk with one another, both in terms of intellectual discourse at every grade level in all areas, but also in terms of the social emotional component of learning and how kids respond to each other in the classroom. So I really see teachers paying a lot of attention to creating activities that allow kids to engage in a meaningful way with the content and develop their discourse skills. So that's both intellectual discourse skills, or what we sometimes call in the field accountable talk, which sounds like very hard, but it really just means I think this because, and I tried this and now, and giving kids those sentence stems to work with, but also about how we treat each other when we disagree. So if I think this because, but you think that because, what happens next matters a lot. And teachers are developing exercises to help guide kids with engaging in a way that's really going to make them ready for moving forward collaboratively in their future.
That's interesting, because it's partly about learning and about civil discourse, but also I imagine it has quite a bit to do with, or maybe I would think, with the attention that we have placed on bullying in our schools. There's been so much concern about it, and people have had so many ideas about what could be done. This sounds to me like something that would hopefully remove that from the equation eventually.
I think you're right, Diane. I think it's one of the ways that teachers are really, and school systems are paying attention to giving kids the skills they need so that it doesn't become a bullying issue, that they know how to talk through the normal conflicts that arise when people are engaged together in an activity.
And civil discourse, could we send Donald Trump for a few classes on that? Okay. You said something to me when I called you before this program, and I found it very poignant. You said, becoming a parent made me a better teacher, becoming the parent of a special needs student made me a better leader. Would you explain that?
Sure. I think that all of our experiences help us grow and become more understanding of the entire experience of being a teacher, being a school leader. And I think it's easy to limit yourself to thinking that the teaching is about the interaction you're having with the student around the content, and not kind of realize that every time we're teaching a student, we're really working with the whole family at every moment. So becoming a parent myself helped me understand that when kids say, on occasion, don't do their homework, it's not something they're doing to me as a teacher. You know, something else, something else is going on that kept them from being, you know, that being the foremost thing in their mind. And then having to help my own children through school work, and then help particularly one of my children that needed a little more support, it really helped broaden my understanding of how systems need to really help us all be ready to embrace all kids and really help families help kids so that they can get what we've promised at school.
You had quite a few things to say, I believe at your confirmation hearing and in the press since then, about special needs students and about special education. And that's been a real hot button issue in a lot of schools, where a lot of school districts feel that they're just spending way too much money on that there has to be a better way to do it. I think 1 out of every $4 spent on education in our state goes to special education, special needs students. What's your approach to that? What's the best way to take care of that?
Well, like many things in education, the best way is going to depend a lot on the local context. So in Connecticut, we really do believe that the local context matters tremendously, and I think that's one of our strengths. So we allow local leaders in local communities to develop systems that work well for them. So I think that's a strength, but it can also be a weakness, because then we have over 160 different entities figuring out their own way to do it. So a really important role that the department can play, and that regional collaboration can play, is to elevate best practices, to demonstrate different approaches that work. So some of our school districts have done audits of their special ed services to really try to look forward, to think about what they can plan to bring some programs back into the district to be more economical, but also to provide those services as close to home as possible for the child. Because when a child can receive their special ed services in their own school, or at least in their own community, that is the ideal.
Right. And I think that I've heard so many people talk about trying to get the assistance that their kids need, and how they almost have to go to war to make it happen sometimes with some of the school systems. And I think that's, the school system's response would be, we have to figure out a way to live within our budget, and we want kids to have what they need, but we also have to be reasonable. So I think there's this kind of delicate thing, that maybe not so delicate thing, that goes on between parents and the school system.
And I think the more information that parents have, and the more transparency that we can have at the department, and that we can help the districts have, the more the parents can feel comfortable with the decisions that are being made at the planning and placement teams. The planning and placement teams are a place where teachers and parents come together to make the decisions for kids, and the more information that they can have at those, the better, and the better the plans can be. And that is an important role the department can play in supporting. We also have helped provide with the best possible guidance on which kinds of progress monitoring and things like that will help us know if the plan we've put into place is helpful.
I'm now going to hit you with the million-dollar question. You mentioned to me that you have, and that the department has high expectations for all students. And of course, one of the things that we wrestle with here in Connecticut is the achievement gap. We have some students in some schools that are so far ahead of all the benchmarks, and then we have students in other schools that are just struggling to reach that. What do we do? And my experience is that every school in Connecticut has some gaps. So even schools that perform very well on the aggregate and on average, on closer examination, some kids haven't yet been able to really access that learning. And one of the most important things we can do is make sure that we're providing good data, so that we really know where our kids are
in alignment with critical benchmarks at each grade level. That kind of information is very powerful because that then becomes the starting point for the school improvement plans, for the district improvement plans, and for individual plans for kids, so that they're catching up, so that every day, every year is they're a little closer to where they need to be. Certainly the achievement gap, when we say, I like to think of it as achievement gaps, because there are certain groups of kids that have not been able to access the promise as much as others. And that's certainly one of our biggest concerns at the department.
Something else that has just been raging, and everybody's gotten involved in this discussion, and I'm going to throw it in your lap because actually you've already handled this for a while, and that's Common Core and the real controversy over Common Core and whether it's benefiting the kids, whether it's not good for the kids. When you went to the State Office of Education, you actually were responsible for helping implement that, so I'm sure you felt the fire. Tell us a little bit about how you think it's working and how you think parents are coming to maybe coalesce around it or coming to accept it.
And I think it probably is good to start with that the Common Core, or in Connecticut, we have CT core standards, Connecticut core standards, because we have core academic standards for all the disciplines in Connecticut, not just for English language arts and math. And the Common Core covers only the English language arts and math. And we, luckily in Connecticut, have a long tradition of educational standards and high educational standards. Our department has provided educational standards for the state since 1998. So for Connecticut, it was less of a transition, I think, than in some states. The thing that was most exciting to me back in 2009, 2010, when we first began to look at the Common Core, was that these standards had actually been written in a way that they are staircasing from kindergarten through the end of 12th grade. So unlike previous standards efforts, and I had been involved as a teacher and later as a leader in some of the earlier versions of standards, which were more like committees where 6th grade kind of didn't really necessarily pay all that much attention to what 7th grade and 5th grade were doing. These were built consciously as a staircase. So for our kids, particularly that came into this system, I think they're going to experience a much more seamless transition because the teachers have better guidance each of the years. In math, one of the key things that's exciting is that rather than study many different topics, for instance, traditionally we would study 10 distinct topics each year, and then actually assess on an even more narrow basis 25 distinct math topics each year. Now, each year only studies up to 4 topics, and they study them in depth until they really know them before they move on. So we used to have an idea with math called spiraling, and in the spiraling model, the idea is if the student didn't really get it that well this year, it's okay. We can move on to chapter 2 because we have these 10 chapters to go on. So we spent about a month in chapter 1 and we're going to move on to chapter 2. And don't worry, Dianna, because it'll come back next year. But I don't know about you, but for me, when it came back next year, I still wasn't getting it. Math wasn't my, and you know, so I think for the kids that got the math quickly in the spiraling model, when it spiraled back next year, it was boring to them. For the kids that had a foundational weakness, it just coming back in front of them didn't do it. So this allows us to really focus in the early grades. For instance, in 1st grade, not surprisingly, addition and subtraction are really big, and the kids work with them deeply, and then when they're ready, they add in to double-digit addition and so on. So they work with it until it's really solid. So we know it'll take time, and that there's a huge communication component that's important for parents to be comfortable.
And that's something that I was just reading a poll this morning that was taken recently in the greater Hartford area, and it was of parents regarding Common Core. And it was almost equal of the parents who feel it's going to be a good thing, the parents who feel it's not a good thing, and then there's a whole group that doesn't have enough information yet to make a decision. They're still kind of holding back on making a decision on that. But the one thing that many people did say, many parents said, was that they don't feel as though the teachers are able to explain to them what this all means. And I wonder if that's because the teachers haven't gotten support that they need.
I think that's a really important point. We've worked for the last few years on building up our teacher supports, and the professional development that we've done over the past 2 years, particularly almost 3 years now, has really been focused on the classroom teachers. Because in of course, the teachers need the support to know how to adjust their lessons, what to do, but also the support to explain to the families and to understand why the change matters. What we're seeing, particularly this year, is that the interest level is really picking up as well among teachers for understanding how to differentiate the Common Core expectations for students with special needs and for English learners. And so we've tried to be responsive to that. We have a website that's devoted to Common Core information, and we also have put all of our professional development there in an on-demand format. So if a teacher couldn't get out, you know, because it's hard to get out, and a lot of teachers don't want to leave the students. I know that was always a concern for me. So they can do it in an on-demand fashion, and we're finding that a lot of the teachers enjoy being able to do the PD web-based, so we have that availability now as well.
If anyone would like to add to the conversation here, whether it's a question or a comment, please just raise your hand and I'll be happy to include you in this. Last week, the CEA, which is, of course, one of the two big teacher unions in the state, held a news conference, and it was, once again, over their concern about standardized testing, the test that's known as SBAC. And they called on you to convene a new committee, which actually the legislature just signed off on in the last session, to convene that committee as soon as possible to study the test. Tell me, first of all, what that committee is charged with doing and how you intend to lead them.
That committee is actually a continuation of a committee that we had in the past academic year.
And by the way, for people that don't know, this is called the Mastery Examination
Committee. That's right. And the Smarter Balanced Assessment Consortium developed the Smarter Balanced Assessment, which we gave in Connecticut as a field test last year, and then gave for the first time operationally this year. And during the field test time period, it became clear that while things were going generally very well in Connecticut, for 11th grade, the test had some unintended consequences. And our students who are in 11th grade are often experiencing a lot of other kinds of tests, like college entrance tests, the SAT or ACT or both. The AP test in May is very big for a lot of our juniors. And that can be a year, too, where they're doing a lot of their preparation to apply to college. So we got a lot of feedback from kids.
I bet you did.
And by 11th grade.
And I'm guessing they said, give us more tests.
Right, yeah. And by 11th grade, they let you know. You know? And having taught that grade, and actually during the field test year, having an 11th grader at my dinner table every night, I got an earful on that. And then we also heard from parents and from teachers. And the concern was really about the amount of time that the various tests take, and the time coming from instruction, because time is finite in our schools, unfortunately. So the governor asked us to direct us to put together a working committee to study this problem, and CEA was had memberships, and as well as the AFT representing teachers, also CAPS representing superintendents, and CAS representing the principals. We also had representation from PTA, and we had from our State Board of Education, and some of the staff most closely aligned with the assessment area. And we studied the issue for most of the last academic year. And this really has resulted in the comfort to move toward the SAT as our assessment.
And that was a pretty recent announcement, right?
It was. We received permission from the federal government just last week to make that move. So that still needs to now we need to move into another phase of it, which will include our State Board of Education approval, and also making sure that all of our students can be accommodated.
So then, if the SAT is going to take the place of the SBAC exam, I also wonder if that means that more students, including those who might not be thinking about college, are now going to take a test that they might not have taken, and maybe that's a good thing.
Well, and that was one of the most compelling ideas for us. We had different groups come and work with us in the working group, and one of the groups that came to speak to the group was a group of educators and students. And the students were from our State Student Advisory Committee, and those are kids that are in 11th or 12th grade, and they're just amazing. when it was an unusual meeting. For one thing, it ended early, and that's very unusual. And I don't know about your meetings, but it's unusual for our meetings. And it was really such an amazing moment, because what we heard from the kids was that they thought all of the tests had value. You know, by then they had experienced the field test the year before, they took all these other tests, but they said that they thought that kids would take the test more seriously if they felt the test was relevant to their futures.
I see.
And they also thought that that in some cases they observed, these were all kids who had taken the SAT, but they observed classmates who might have not had that opportunity, maybe weren't able to take the SAT. Because traditionally the SAT is offered on Saturdays,
Right.
and kids have to pay for it and get themselves there, and those are barriers. So by offering SAT School Day, which is what we will be doing, and by removing the cost barrier, we do hope that we'll be able to engage kids that might not otherwise take the SAT, and who may be surprised to learn that that's an option for them.
Yeah, I think that's the part of it that excited me. One of the things that I wondered about then is, okay, so that sort of takes care of the 11th graders. Now how about the other grades where they have taken these tests, 3rd through 8th grade?
And so we're in a great place now to reconvene that working group when school comes back and the teachers are available, and to begin to study, how did the experience go in the operational year? How did our kids do? What do the kids report? What do the teachers report? What do the parents report? And what do we need to think about in terms of whether this is helping us know where our kids are on that path to college readiness by the end of 12th grade?
One of the things that I often hear parents, I'll get to you in just a second, thank you. One of the things I hear parents talking about, and I hear teachers talking about it too, is that preparing for the tests takes up too much time, that it takes away time from classroom instruction. But you said something very interesting in a story that I read recently. You said these tests are not to be prepared for. Explain what you mean by that.
Yes, these are annual checkups, kind of like any of us go to the doctor on an annual basis. So when we go for our annual checkup, very likely they check some basic things. Until recently, when I hit a magic age, it was only a few basic things, like 4 basic biometrics. They would check, they usually check your blood pressure, your blood sugar, cholesterol, maybe weight. And generally, for instance, I'll speak to my case, I have a couple that my doctor's concerned with. If I want to improve those biometrics so that by next year, they indicate that I'm in better health or I'm on a better health trajectory, I don't do that by practicing my physical exam. I don't, sit there and have a pretend conversation with the doctor, but what I do is I adjust habits on a daily basis, and maybe I do check in more frequently if I need to check my blood pressure or something like that, but I change something about how I do. When we get information from our annual state assessment, that's a great piece of data to really provide inquiry. And what can it tell us? One of the most important things it can tell us is, in the biggest picture, are we preparing all of our kids? How did some of our kids do? Did everybody get the equal chance to learn that? It allows you to look at program. And the most important questions are, which results are you surprised about? Because, for instance, if you talk to school and district leaders and you say, well, I'm not that surprised that my 5th grade didn't do that well, because we didn't change that curriculum yet. That's happening next year, so that doesn't really surprise me. But, 7th grade, we changed that curriculum. That should be better. So it allows you to examine your program, make your adjustments, and really make sure that you're providing an opportunity for all kids. On an individual child level, it helps us know which kids need additional support and intervention to be able to meet those grade level standards. So it's an annual checkup, and it should not be prepared for. So what we shouldn't see.
So you don't believe in that phrase of teaching to the test?
Not at all. So the best way to do well on these tests, and especially these new tests, is to have rich, robust classroom instruction. So if our kids get the instruction they've been promised, the tests will, over time, the kids will do better and better. And the indicator, if they're not doing well, the way to do better is not by practicing the test. It's by really looking at what kind of instruction the kids need.
I found that really refreshing. I thought that was a whole different attitude. And I think I'll get to you in a second. I think we have one question right here. I did have a trigonometry teacher. I grew up in New York State, and we took the Regents exams in high school. And every single day for an entire year, my trigonometry teacher said, this will be on the test. So by the time the test came, we were like, yes, go ahead, please.
You probably know the controversy recently about the advanced placement history exam. The criticism was that the original guides were too negative about American history, and conservatives argued that they should be revised. They were changed. I'm just wondering how the Connecticut Department of Education responds to national controversies like this. So what's the response?
That's a great question. And we're really very pleased at the department to be in a position where we have a state educational consultant for social studies. That was a long vacancy, and we're really pleased to have someone in that role. So we have a point person for social studies, which is wonderful. As you can imagine, as social studies people tend to do, they love a controversy. So, so they discuss it, and they read articles, and they talk to each other. And actually, this is the 2-week period when they're doing a lot of professional development in the state for social studies teachers, and that is one of the sessions that they're dealing with is what about AP? How do you teach AP well and deal with the political lens? How do you engage the kids in the controversy of how are we portraying different things in history? So they are a great bunch of people, and we're thrilled with, we're very lucky in Connecticut to have a very vibrant and very engaged social studies community. And this is a great place because this is sort of the center of a lot of that, but we're very fortunate to have good leadership in that area.
You used a term that I found really interesting. You said as they're discussing this in their professional development, they're considering the political lens. How much does that fit into curriculum, or do you try to keep that out or keep it as neutral as possible?
Well, I think in most subject areas, and this is where social studies is kind of different and special, although I think science is too. In most subject areas, you're thinking mostly about your content and things like that. But there, in terms of helping kids deeply understand, one of the facets of understanding that really helps kids go deep with content is the idea of perspective. And kids need to understand that, and as they particularly, but even at young ages, but as they mature, that a historical event or a political event can be viewed from many different perspectives. So one of the things that our framework attends to and that the professional development helps teachers do is use primary sources in the classroom so that the kids can engage in the conversation that was occurring at the time and see that it's not just that these things happened and that these folks are good people and these folks are bad people, but really that there were a number of different perspectives going on, and that that's part of how the event occurred and how in some ways events are never over and that we're always dealing with them throughout history.
Yeah. Something that we talk about here quite a bit at the Old State House, that history is still happening, and our perspective on it is what changes it. I think we had a question over here. If we can bring the microphone over here, Bill. You were raising your hand, weren't you? Yes.
I'm Eve Peck from the World Affairs Council of Connecticut, and our mission is to bring global programming, global knowledge to our citizenry and also our youth. I have a two-pronged question for you. It's in connection, I'm interested in your thoughts on these two initiatives which seem to be growing across the United States. I recently came back from a conference in Chicago where educators were gathered from across the United States, and they're discussing initiatives in their state to give out global competency certificates for students who have shown through a period of study that they are, that they excel in global studies. And the other question I have is when we're talking about assessment and we're talking about the need to understand what a student can do and how they can engage, I wondered what your thoughts are about the idea of digital badging, where students can be awarded a digital badge showing that they have engaged in some type of activity, often outside of the classroom. And those learning experiences are also very needed.
Okay.
Eve, your questions are related. There's a theme of demonstrating competence, and how do we recognize the competencies that kids are acquiring both in and out of school. And in 2013, the legislature approved the ability in Connecticut for a school district on a permissive basis. They may choose to award high school credit for demonstrations of competencies that are equivalent to courses. So there's a lot of work to do at the local level for people to really think about what would we do to demonstrate. We're used to the idea that, I took trigonometry as well, and I sat there all year. We're not going to discuss what competencies I may or may not have developed, but I got a credit, right? So we're used to the idea of seat time and doing at least 60% usually gets you a passing score, that sort of thing. In competency-based learning, we're actually looking for a much higher threshold of demonstration of competency. So some of our districts have engaged in this process of really beginning to look at what it would mean to award promotion and high school credentialing on capacity. And Windsor Locks is one of the districts that's particularly kind of going pretty far with this right now. Some of the other districts are also moving along. We have a small, I think it's at this point, 20-something of our high schools are moving in this direction. So we do support that. We've, through the department, our staff, along with a wide stakeholder group, developed guidelines for competency-based, and we call it mastery-based learning, because we want to make sure that threshold's very high, and our state board recently approved those guidelines. So we have an initial set of guidelines out to help districts do that. At this point, from the state lens, we haven't yet moved into the digital badging for kids, although some districts are doing that. But we're also looking at it for teachers and thinking about credentialing differently and thinking about how we indicate what someone knows how to do. In our older thinking, we always thought, well, you have a certificate. And I hold 4 different certificates, so I can teach theoretically things covered by those 4 certificates. And some of those things you would probably be very happy to have me teaching, and some of those things, you might not, like 8th grade math. Legally, I could teach that. You might want to know a little bit more about me before you did that. So the idea of badging and indicating some deeper, greater credentialing is something that's of high interest for us. We're particularly interested in investigating the seal of biliteracy, which is something that some states are doing to promote the idea that students who are fortunate enough to either be literate in 2 languages or more than 2 languages, or who acquire that during their schooling, that's really a really important, sometimes we still call it 21st century skills, even though we're well into the 21st century, but the skills our kids are going to need. So we're particularly interested in those kinds of forward-looking approaches.
I think we have a question right in the center here.
I'm an engineer, and I've worked in Connecticut in organizations helping Connecticut businesses and manufacturers. I later became a certified teacher. That's where the gray hair came from. And I taught in the schools, and there was often a mismatch between what was being taught and what students actually needed in the real world. When you talk about curriculum development, what steps are being taken to make sure that there's a better alignment with education and real world?
That's a great question. And one of the reasons we're very committed to the core standards really has to do with that we believe that starts with standards, that starts with things that kids need to know and be able to do to be successful in their world, but then that the development of local curriculum, which in Connecticut happens at the local level, but with often our support and guidance, that needs to take into account the evolving context that kids will graduate into. And when we think about, for instance, I'm constantly pushed to think differently about how we should be helping our teachers and our school districts plan for instruction. I had an experience this summer where, in my mind, when I want to learn something, I still take a class. It's one of the things, I got the MCC thing came in the mail recently, and I'm like, oh, I could take that bread making class. I could do this. If I want to learn something, I decide that there's a pathway for me to learn that. I had an experience this summer where my 9-year-old wanted to learn something, Java something, to be able to do something with his Minecraft. There was a lot of somethings in that sentence because I'm not sure about Java or Minecraft. But my college-age son was home and kept promising to teach him. Mm-hmm. And then one day I said, what are you doing? He says, oh, I'm hacking or modding or something, my Minecraft. I said, oh, good, your brother taught you to do that. He says, no, I got tired of waiting for him. I went to YouTube. And so I was thinking that we needed to be providing, and I do think we need to be providing support for our elementary teachers to learn enough coding to help our kids because coding seems to be, it's like the new cursive writing. For years, we made them, all write cursive. They're much more likely to need to code than to write cursive in their adult world. And so, and I think that is a good idea.
So that's why there's no penmanship in school anymore?
Well, I think there is, but just a little now, not as much as there once was. And I think that when we think about what do our kids need, anything we name now is likely to be irrelevant by the time they graduate if they're in elementary school. So I think the idea of developing processes at the local level that engage business, community, industry, engage folks who are really paying attention to that evolving world. I didn't know what a 3D printer was until 5 years ago. And when I first saw it, and now they're in middle schools, and middle school kids know how to use them. I was a middle school teacher a long time. I never would have in a million years been able to predict that that was something my kids would need to know how to do. And so I just think that we have to be attentive to these trends, but we need to really welcome in the folks that understand this better than we do as educators and develop curriculum models together, and that's best done at the local level.
We have a question right over here.
Hi, I'm Helen Charoff with the Connecticut Invention Convention. Along the same lines, with the advent of the Next Generation Science Standards, NGSS, which are federal standards now in the process of being adopted in a number of states, including here in Connecticut, how do you see those standards actually being implemented or affect, especially elementary and middle school education in science, which is so important to the state and the nation?
Helen, that's a great question. Thank you for asking that. And it allows me to acknowledge one of our, he's looking at me like, please don't, right? Hank Gruner, who's here in the audience. Yeah, right, exactly. And, we're very attentive to the exciting changes in science standards nationally. And as you may know, our department's been working on that for over 3 years with partners. Our approach there is that we recognize how much change has occurred in our classrooms, and particularly in our elementary classrooms in the last 5 years. When the new English language arts and math standards came in, for a high school teacher, that affects what you do if you're an English teacher, for sure, or as a middle school teacher. But if you're an elementary school teacher, that was 2 new content areas to learn at the same time. In general, we don't do that in education. We cycle and sequence our changes because an elementary teacher, and a lot of our, certainly K-6, but sometimes 7 and 8 too, they teach everything. So we don't usually give them 2 new things to learn at once. It was important to catch up to be able to do that. As we think about science, what we're doing is really moving in a way that's a multi-year effort to get our teachers comfortable with what's expected. There are content adjustments for NGSS, and there's some engineering content, for instance, that we didn't necessarily used to include and at every grade level. But then also there are pedagogical changes. One of the great opportunities, though, is that it's all about inquiry. And the inquiry strand that runs through the new science standards is really a nice parallel to what we call the arc of inquiry, which is part of our social studies standards. So we're really, all through the curriculum, focused on having kids engage meaningfully with materials and develop their own inquiry questions and really go deep with things. And that's a nice change.
Yeah. I have a question that's been kind of hanging around my head since the legislative session ended, and that is, every year it seems to me that the legislature passes some sort of a bill that requires a new course of study in schools, okay? These all came out of the 2015 session. Financial literacy, history of labor and free market capitalism, CPR training. Now, I can see the importance of all of those, but do you have to lose something to fit those in? And how does the education department feel about the fact that the lawmakers are determining what classes should be taught?
Well, you
don't have to be too polite about it.
Well, we do really believe that curricular decisions should be made as close to the kids as possible. And in Connecticut, we really do, we believe in the local development of curriculum because that's where getting the teachers engaged at the local level and really working on what kids get to learn and how we'll know if they've learned it. We know that that's like where the magic is. And so more requirements need to be considered then in terms of where do they fit in. So I think there's always a balance, because if there are too many things on the must-do list, it can limit, and how do you get it all in? Although what we do is we provide support and guidance in sort of where does that fit in the curriculum. So for instance, CPR goes well in our health and wellness standards. So I think that's not going to be as hard as it initially sounds, to fit that in. And the labor and free market capitalism was already a focus within the social studies. So there are areas where sometimes there is a new thing and you say, well, how will we do that? I love the approach we took with the personal finance education, and I don't know if anyone here has kids that either are in college or have gone to college, but you want them to become aware of the personal finance
Especially before they take out all the credit cards that they get offered every day, right?
And loans and things. So that's it's definitely something we want to see. At the same time, we recognize that our local districts struggle sometimes to be able to produce so many different curriculum documents in the same year. So that's a lot, and it comes out. The session finishes in June, and this time at the very, very end of June, and they've already planned what they were going to write for this summer. So now they get anxious because it takes them a while to catch up in the district on that. So what we've done with the personal finance is at our website, there is a model curriculum which people can use. It's not a mandate, but it's there if people would like to use it. And we also have the ability for people to sign up for a distance learning course that we sponsor, that a teacher teaches. Yeah, and so that's a way that districts can get some collaboration. They can work together on that. But it is certainly a really important topic.
Yeah, we have a question over here.
Hi, my name is Carmen Worcester, and I am a member of elders that sit at the table, and they're concerned about hiring practices, especially in the Hartford area, of Latino and Black teachers. And would you, as commissioner, be reviewing those hiring practices?
Well, our department has a minority teacher recruitment committee that is working with districts. And this year, we adjusted our approach a little bit to do direct grants to districts so they could develop innovative approaches to working on the issue of bringing more minority teachers in. In terms of the statistics and their availability, we do have a section on our website that people can go to look at the demographic representation. The goal of the Minority Teacher Recruitment Committee is to see more representation among minority in the teaching force and in the leading force. So that is the goal.
A question that's come up a number of times recently, and it seems to cycle every so often. Are middle school and high school students being hurt by early school start times?
Yeah.
There are these studies that say, right, that the kids have a certain sleep cycle and that they should be allowed to sleep a little later. And, maybe some of the schools are starting, according to those studies, starting earlier than the kids are really ready to function. Yeah. What do you think about that?
Well, it's interesting you bring that up, and I think it's such an important topic, and it does seem to come back.
Yeah.
And one of the things, we have a state student advisory committee, and they're a wonderful group of kids. It's so great to see young people this engaged so early, and they report periodically to our State Board of Education. And last year, last academic year, we usually give them topics to study, and I asked them to study the assessment situation for the 11th graders, and also whether or not it would be beneficial to require community service. Mm-hmm. And then the third thing, they choose their own, and the thing they chose was school start time. So they did a very in-depth study of school start time. So I have some experts if you want to talk to them. And it certainly was of high interest to them. And it was interesting to learn that some of the kids were experiencing districts that had gone to an altered start time. Mm-hmm. And they reported liking that, in that they felt more alert in class and things like that. And they were able to do that without affecting their after-school program. But it is something that it seems is difficult to see change in. Mm-hmm. And I think we need to think differently about the school day in general, because a lot of times the school day that we live and the school year that we live, I think it's oft-quoted that our school year was created for an agrarian economy, and our school approach for an industrial economy. We're trying to adjust our school approach. And when you adjust your school approach to take into account more robust, interactive learning, things like competency-based education, but you don't adjust the school year or the school day, I think that we're going to struggle. We're only going to get so far. And we also need to be attentive to the needs of families. There was a time when families could be more flexible around getting kids to school or being available for the buses, but we have many working families, and it's difficult for families sometimes with the school day. So thinking about longer school days, I think, is going to be important, and thinking differently about the school day and what occurs at what points in the school day, I think, is going to be really important.
There was a story in Hartford Magazine recently about a Chinese student who had come here on I guess a one-year program to study in high school. And I forget which school system he went to in Connecticut, but his experience had been that he was at school at 7 in the morning and didn't leave school until 9 or 10 o'clock at night. And when people said to him, how do you like going to school here? He said, it's a piece of cake. So I don't know whether we want to go till 10 o'clock at night, but it strikes me that so many other cultures and other countries have already done that, have already gone to a much longer school day and a longer school year or a school year round.
Right. And I think access to what we think of as after school. If we think of a lot of high schools ended about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and I'm not sure it's a great idea for teenagers to have not that much to do in the early afternoon when parents are probably at work, but also to have really great what we think of as after school programs. And I think that idea of after school programs and the school day is an idea we may need to try to get rid of, and maybe think of it as learning time, and think about the learning day rather than the school day. And I think we have to push on a lot of these concepts to get what we need for our kids. And I do think it takes more time than we've been giving it.
Yeah. We have time for one more question if anybody has a question or a comment they'd like to make. Bill, could you come right over here?
I just wanted to say two things. I'm a former retired teacher and a school board member, and I want to applaud the SAT for all the students in Connecticut. And I think you are going to find students who have been hidden, especially in the cities, who, if you find them early enough, can be saved or can be directed. And I just think this is wonderful. Cutting out those other tests, as a school board member, the amount of money we spend on consultants and testing is obscene. And I think we really have to applaud the state for taking this, and especially for the the city schools. The other thing that I'm distressed by is the lack of foreign language requirements in the high schools. The number of high schools now that don't require a foreign language before they graduate. And the emphasis by certain school systems that start the second language in kindergarten, these are not necessarily the school systems where it should be started, and where you have bilingual students already in the system, and the ability. I taught ESL for 3.5 years in Puerto Rico in the 70s when there was no English teaching at all. And I have to say that the ESL programs that are in schools now, where you take the students you have who are bilingual, and anyone who is bilingual knows that this is a gift that Americans rarely ever have. There's the joke about, what's a trilingual, 3 languages, what's a bilingual, 2 languages, what's a monolingual, the Americans, because we don't have the emphasis. And we have a rich cultural background in Connecticut that we're not using, and I would love to see that more of an emphasis too.
I have a couple of questions I want to get to before we have to close this out. And one is the Winchester schools. The state is taking over those schools. I know that's something that the state does not do lightly. It's happened in other school systems over the last just number of years, not that long. What needs to happen in the Winchester school system, and how is the state's involvement going to help it?
Thank you for asking that. It is a very rare occurrence that the state intervenes directly in a school district like we will be doing with Winchester. And in this particular case, it became clear over the course of many months, over about a year, that many critical systems had broken down in the district, and the district was going to struggle even with significant support from our office to right itself. So what's the most, we've and we're grateful to the legislature for supporting the efforts with appropriate legislation to allow us to provide more direct assistance to Winchester. And we have appointed a receiver, and the receiver will act as both the administrator, having all the powers that a superintendent would normally have, but also act as the governance during the receiver period, which will be 2 years. So making all the critical decisions that would normally be made by the board while they put things in order. And the first effort is really to make sure school can open on time. The kids can arrive on the first day of school, that the buses run, that the classrooms are clean and ready, that teachers are there, and that the HR and fiscal systems are in order to pay the teachers and things.
That sounds so basic, but this is a school system that at one point, I guess last year, said we may not reopen after Christmas.
The difficulties.
And I thought, we're in Connecticut. How could that happen?
I think the difficulties really are related to critical systems. So that's when we can be helpful, because we can take what we know about the technical systems it takes to keep a school district running and get those in place, make sure they're up and running and good, and then get at some of the more, the things that'll keep them independent over time, like getting all of the governance systems in order and all of the administrative systems so that they can be in good shape. So we're pleased as well. The community has been incredibly supportive. So the local community really has rallied around their school district, and we're glad to be there in that kind of support and intervention role.
One of the things that you said that you are most proud of in your career has been helping to get Two Rivers Magnet School up and running. What's the role for magnet schools, charter schools, non-traditional public schools in our state system?
That's a great question, and it's one I think we'll be exploring over the next couple of years. As we look at our desegregation efforts and where we are now, and I think nationally as we all look at these efforts, we need to think, and what next? You know, we know we were able to, through a research study, we know that there are benefits to a magnet education. There are benefits to some of our other innovations. We know from our school choice study that we saw benefits for students attending charter schools. We saw benefits for students attending magnet schools. One of the most important next steps with all of that is going to be to say, and what do we do with what we learn? So if these are innovative kind of lab schools, they only serve a small portion of Connecticut school children. So how do we take what we learn in these unique environments and then spread that information in a way that's useful? It'll have to be tailored to local contexts, and that's something in Connecticut that we feel strongly about. But how do we take important things we learn in these environments? I know one of the most important things I learned at Two Rivers was really my content, social studies that I feel very passionately about, kind of was a backseat, you know, in a lot of ways, because this was an environmental science magnet school. I have to tell you, you know, so I went in thinking, am I going to be okay with this? You know, it's all really about environmental science. That's what we run with. What we went through as a staff to prepare to open in terms of team building and also getting engaged ourselves in environmental science activities, and then what we did together created such a strong school. And I really felt that all of the instruction, the disciplinary instruction, was strengthened by that. So it really helped me learn that we are stronger together, and that sort of through understanding what kids needed to know about environmental science really helped me make social studies more relevant, because then we could ask questions like, well, we're here located at the place where two rivers come together, and it looked like this in the 1950s, and this in the 1970s, and this now. You know, who and what are the agents of change? And it turns out that the environmental aspects were very wrapped up in governance, citizenship, history, all kinds of things I care about. So it was a great experience.
Well, Commissioner, I want to thank you so much for coming and spending this time with us. I have to say that with all those questions that I mentioned were controversial and that were hot topics, you handle all of those with grace and ease, and I think the parents are going to really appreciate that as you go into your administration further and further. So I want to thank you so much for spending time with us, and it was really terrific to get to know you a little bit.
Well, thank you, Diane. It was truly an honor. Thank you.